It's like, who are my people? Like, I don't know. It's like who you, as the kids say, like who you vibe with, those are your people. And so, and it's not a geographic thing. It's not a skin color thing. It's a vibe thing, as they say, like who you connect with on an emotional and an intellectual level.
When Steve McCoy moved from Malaysia to the UK as an A-level student, he thought of it as a homecoming. This is Writer's Mosaic, What We Leave We Carry, the series that tells the true life stories of migration to the UK.
I'm Steve McCoy. I'm from Malaysia and I came to the UK to be educated in 1978, I think. 1977 to do A-levels, and then I stayed here, went to university, stayed for a long time, about 30 years, I think. The name is from Ireland originally. An ancestor was from County Armagh, and he, I think, as far as we know, was a doctor in the British Army and went to India and kind of stayed. You know, it was like party town, good times all round. And he had a son who then married a French lady, went back to Ireland, became a doctor, went back to India, and then the family stayed there. Eventually they were into the railways and moved, down the empire to east to Malaysia. So that's where I was born. Race is an official designation as part of your official identity, and there are different privileges given to different races. So I am officially an other. So the main race is Malay, the second largest race is Chinese, and then they're the Indians, and then everybody else is lumped together in the fourth category. So I guess officially I'd be Eurasian. You're at the bottom of the rung in terms of the privileges that are handed out by the state. So, for example, university places are reserved according to the different, well, in my day, right, it's changed now. It's got even worse, but are reserved according to the percentage of population of that particular race. So the largest race is Malays. They get the largest batch of university places, and then Chinese, and others, I think at that time, were 4% of the population. So we were all fighting for 4% of the university places. I guess my parents did not think I was smart enough to get one of those places. So to counter that, they sent me to England. My mum showed me this article that she had written, which was published in the papers. And what had happened was her dad was given a ticket to go to the homeland, to England, for the coronation of the Queen. And instead of going himself, he let his, darling daughter go. And in response, my mum wrote these aerograms, these kind of old style letters, back to her dad, describing her experience. And it was this amazing, gush of how wonderful and how gallant the prince looked, and how, it was just like, it was from the mindset that the empire was our home.
Finally, the moment everybody had been waiting for, the arrival of the Queen and her own personal escort. First came the detachment of horse guards and grenadier guards in their bearskins. Then came a detachment of the Royal House Artillery wheeling gun carriages. They were so prim and wonderfully smart in their black uniforms with gold stripes, hussars' caps, which looked rather like a fez, and riding perfectly on superb horses. Then came all the Queen's surgeons, physicians, chaplains, and other professional attendants on foot, followed by her ACDs, of which our own General Templar was one. Then the state coach drew up. Oh, it was so like a dream I had to pinch myself to make sure I was awake. It is futile to try to describe it. The fairy queen and the gallant duke just completed the picture. They're such a lovely, handsome couple. None of their pictures half do them the credit they deserve. The coach drew up to the entrance with a fanfare of trumpets, pealing bells, and every one of the millions standing up and singing "God Save the Queen." It was an exhilarating and thrilling moment. She got down, assisted by the Duke and her maids of honour, to thunderous cheers from the crowd. Just before entering the abbey, she turned round and bowed to the crowd outside, and at that spontaneous act the cheering increased tenfold.
And so I don't know, I either bought into that or subliminally, accepted that we were part of the Commonwealth, that was part of our heritage. And when I came to England, it was, I was going to the motherland. And for me, this was the home of football, right? This is where it all happens, And this was around the time of the winter of discontent. So in those days, there were a lot of strikes going on, and people were very discontented with their living conditions. So there were dead bodies on the road because the gravediggers had gone on strike. There was rubbish everywhere because the dustmen had gone on strike. And it was just bizarre, for me to come to that place from a relatively functioning developing country to this kind of chaos. I didn't want to go because at that time I was a sports person, and I had a goal of going to the Olympics, and that would disrupt my training and my position in the team and all that kind of stuff. So I was really concerned about that, like small things. But as soon as I got there, I went to school, public school, and I just loved it. Because it was I could hang out with and play cricket and play football, from morning to dusk. So it wasn't just me, it was a bunch of my friends from school. We were all kind of doing that journey of going to do A-levels in England, different schools, in order to get into university. So I wasn't going on my own completely, but it was really a mixture of excitement. But if you forced me to choose one, it would be more kind of exciting, although apprehensive. It wasn't my first time in England. My parents, wise enough to take me out of school when I was 12 and send me to live with one of their friends for a term. So at the age of 12, I went to school in England. So it was not the first time I was there. But it was nothing special, getting here, except it was bloody cold. And that was a real shock because it was a traditional public school. It was bloody cold. There was not a lot of hot water, no carpets on the ground, that kind of thing. But as soon as spring came about, it was fine. For some reason, which I still, can't completely put my finger on, most of my interactions have always been positive. I guess, I'm small, and I spoke good English, so I was never maybe perceived as a threat or, like somebody from the outside, and I could disarm people quite quickly. All my associations with ordinary people were positive. Even when I lived in the East End, I lived in Canning Town for a bit, which was quite rough in those days. And we were, quite posh because we were medical students down the road. So either I was just oblivious to it and didn't notice, these kind of things. But all my interactions, certainly in the early days, but throughout, I think, were all positive. It was very difficult to pigeonhole me. I think certainly, and I was quite confident and to interact and, courteous and interested in people. So I would not just say, oh, hi, but I'd ask questions and like interact with as many people as they could. One of the things that really hit me when I was there, I went there when I was quite old, so I was 17, and I had a driving license, and I had learned how to drive in Malaysia. And there's always there's a culture of how you behave on the road, and our way of behaving on the road was very selfish, and this was one of the biggest things that struck me about being in England, was the kind of after you culture. And people on the road just were not happy with the way I was driving because I was an asshole. No, I was just very selfish, and I would be cutting in and like trying to gain ground, and I was not queuing up in the way Brits were, just happy to do that and to let the person out if it makes sense for the road traffic. So that was certainly one of the things that I clocked as being my culture is very different to what's going on here. And I think, like, even today, the ability of a culture to have an after you polite courtesy thing is just so difficult, because I think it's so easy to default to self and selfishness. I think my parents had absorbed the British culture, so the idea of tea and proper tea and proper cutlery and table manners, those were all all very familiar to me. I didn't have to learn table manners, for example, which I know is like it's not a thing for a lot of other cultures. So yeah, it was not there were not many things that grated with me. In Malaysia, if you were part of a proper racial group, the patriarchs and matriarchs would always try and encourage people to marry within the community, right? So, and in fact, with Malay people who have to be Muslim, they're not allowed to marry anybody else. So if they can marry somebody else, but they have to become Muslim, and they're given a new title which designates them as like a Malay. Like, they coined this new phrase Bumi Putra, which means Prince of the Earth. But for me, I was a product of not just one interracial marriage, like many throughout the ancestors, like including in my mother's side. My mother's side is mainly from Sri Lanka, but there's Swedish people in the Dutch people. So there was a lot of intermarriage during the empire, when everybody was kind of trading and traveling around when they didn't have passports. So it was normalized for me. Yeah, it didn't occur to me to not go out with white women, or because there's although I'm dark skinned, it was never really part of my identity because I was always an other. I was never part of this or part of that. I was identified as not that and not this. So I was just in limbo land. So there's no burden for me to live up to any particular racial group or cultural group. I was free to choose and mix and match. Although I did get comments if I was on the tube in England with my whoever that was, a white girl, but those comments were always directed at her, not at me. Like, so what is she doing with him? Somebody like that. It didn't happen that often, really, because we were in London. So and in those days, I think we were talking in the 80s. I think there was, I mean, certainly in the things that we used to do, I mean, it was just very normalized. We weren't like typical immigrants coming to Britain to make a new life. I was just there to be educated. And in fact, most of my friends who made the same journey, school, university, most of them just left and went back home immediately after university. You get the thing that you came for, and then you're back home to get a job and to run the family business or something. So that's not something I did, but it was never, we were never part of an immigrant community who was like trying to, make a foothold in a new country. So it was much more transactional. We pay our fees we get the thing. My parents were fortunate enough to be able to, so they had a flat in Notting Hill Gate in the days when they bought the flat for £36,000. I read medicine in London, in Whitechapel, London Hospital, and I never qualified, so I didn't pass all my final exams. I was interested in doing lots of different things. I was doing a bit of drama, a bit of music, and was really enjoying, the creative aspect of my life, which I'd never had growing up. So I was always, what do you want to be? You don't know, okay, be a doctor because, that's a good thing. What do you need to do to be a doctor? Well, you need to do maths, physics, and chemistry. So I just followed that line, had no education virtually in any creative I didn't have a creative outlet. I knew hardly any history, cultural studies, nothing. So it was a time for me to explore, the other parts of my interest. And then that just took a long time. I ended up, moving from the music scene, which was super exciting in the 1980s. It was very fast moving. The music technology that we take for granted now was just beginning. I did a course on digital recording in Brixton back in the day. And then I made a sideways move to do theology via working in a church. So I had a kind of religious experience when I was at university and had drifted away from that and wanted to spend some time thinking about the big questions, that kind of thing. So I guess, me meandering through life just left me hanging out here for longer. It was not an intentional thing. It was just, stepping one foot in front of the other. And there's a phrase that I quite like is crossing a river by feeling for the stones underfoot. It was that kind of thing. Not building a bridge to get to the other side. You just have to track your way around. So I think that's what led me to be here so long. I don't know where this came from, but I always felt that there was a responsibility to respect the culture that you're in. But it was easy for me because English culture was not so foreign from where I came from. I mean, it was just very natural for me, for example, to support the England football team. England was the home of football, and although, you love the French team, you love the Brazilians, but I need to support England. And football, never came home, as they say. Same with cricket. Like, cricket was a new thing. I think it's a bit different because Malaysia doesn't really play cricket. So I know there was a lot of friction in Britain for, traditional British people when immigrants from the West Indies and India and Pakistan, which are huge cricketing countries, would not support England, although they lived in England, right? They called England their home, but would, love to see the English beaten by their, home team. So I never felt that. So I was always supporting England. There's an element of my understanding of colonialism, which I think for Malaysia, and of course, like this is just subjective, right? This is how I read it. That Malaysia was net positive when it came to, so we got a lot more from being a colony and gaining an education system and gaining a police system and gaining a government system and a court system. All the stuff that we lost was just natural resources like tin and rubber and later oil palm, which we learned how to manage and exploit from the Brits anyway. So in that sense, we didn't have, or I wasn't aware, but I was privileged, so I was from a educated, middle class family. So I wasn't aware of all the negative things that come normally with a colonizing experience. And I think it's obviously very different for Indians, for subcontinent people, West Indians, where we didn't have the kind of legacies that other colonized cultures had. So in that sense, there's no inherent drive to get one over the Brits, from my kind of thing, that I didn't have those negative stories about being a colonized people. If I was to do an audit of my life, right, so by actual time, it's almost 50-50 that I've spent time in Malaysia and time in Britain or in Europe. Like I spent a bunch of years in Poland as well. But in terms of influence, again, it's just very difficult to say. But I would say I was much, much more influenced by British culture than anything else. I'd often use this phrase that I had a good BBC education, listened to Radio 4, lots of LBC, London Talk Radio in those days, and engaged with the conversations that you never would have from a formal education. That certainly influenced me so much. But I was coming from a place that was used to that kind of thing, although we didn't have Radio 3, Radio 4. We did have the World Service, and my mum always used to have you get the expensive radio and tune into shortwave and listen to the World Service. I certainly appreciate the typical British courtesy. I don't know that I'm super polite as a person, right? I can be whatever, but I appreciate that. I really think that is something very difficult for cultures. Having experienced other cultures which are much more self-centered. When I was at university in the East End of London and living in what used to be the Isle of Dogs, and by the time that I had got into the music scene and was playing with my band around the pubs, you get to know the local people. So your friends expand away from just your little bubble, which was medical college, into kind of normal people in the pub that you meet, and you get gigs and stuff, and you get to know people. That was just very different to a privileged middle class life in Malaysia, and I just loved that. I loved being in the East End at that time, knowing the local people, knowing the local oddballs who would hang out. The more British I came in that situation, which is the East End of London, Cockneys, the more I liked it. I didn't lose anything. I kind of gained stuff. So my idea of home completely changed, because the more I thought about the concept of home, I realized that we don't really think about home. We just assume that it is a place where your parents are. It is where you where you feel comfortable, where you feel safe. It's all the feeling things, and the definition just kind of follows, and it's obvious, right? It's obvious that home is where you were born, where your people are, right? And so when you kind of lose your sense of those are my people and these are not my people, and the more at home you feel in this other place, then the concept of home becomes just not a useful thing. This struck me even more when I moved to Poland. So there's a time in 1989 where I was fascinated by the end of the Cold War and the Berlin Wall coming down. I went to Romania that winter just to see what was going on. We didn't have the internet, we didn't know what Prague looked like. Paris was the only wonderful city. I remember being totally struck by Budapest, driving in, thinking, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. And then when I moved to Poland and felt comfortable in Poland after, can't remember exactly, but once I learned how to speak Polish with ordinary people, you kind of feel at home. Home-ish, inverted commas. It was very monocultural. It was very white. I was the only non-white face there, but felt very comfortable and felt a kinship for Polish people. That kind of just explodes. Who are my people? I don't know. It's who you, as the kids say, who you vibe with, those are your people. And so, and it's not a geographic thing, it's not a skin color thing. It's a vibe thing, as they say, like who you connect with on an emotional and an intellectual level. After spending, I can't remember how many years of getting specific student visas, having to prove that I had a place at a official, institution of education. I was given this thing called permanent residence (PR) status, where it stamps in your passport. This person has leave to remain here indefinitely. So, and to me, that was just useful at not having to do the admin every time, of getting a visa to come into the country. And of course, we've never always had passports as a people. People used to be able to travel freely. It struck me most at my privilege when we would to go where we used to go to France for holiday, and all my friends would just not think about it, just get on the ferry and go over. I had to go and queue at the French embassy to get a visa, and there was one time where I had a recording contract, so I had to go and play on this record in those days, and the recording studio was in Paris, and it was a very quick deal. I was a session musician, and I just forgot that I wasn't English, and I had to get a visa. So I got to the plane, and they wouldn't let me on the plane, and I lost the gig. I couldn't play on this record. It wasn't a very good record in the end, but so you can normalize, kind of being part here, and then suddenly something tells you that no, you're not the same here. Okay, don't think that you're. If I were to think, was it a good idea to come to Britain? I would say, well, first of all, it was nothing to do with me. I was a kid. I just, my parents did what they could, and from their perspective, I think it was really the only thing they could do. Malaysia was very volatile politically, and it was based on racial groups. I just happened to be the wrong race. You can't change your race, right? It's something that you inherit. So they made virtually the only decision that they could, and they were privileged enough. They were wealthy enough to be able to make that decision. So it was just it was a foregone conclusion, in that sense. And yeah, you only have the life that you live, and that's the only thing. And then I'm a pretty positive person, so it's half full rather than half. I like the life that I've had. It has not been intentional, largely. But yeah, it's been good. But I don't know what it could have been. I think it's probably true for most people that the freedoms in Britain would allow somebody to have a bespoke life identity in a way that might not be true in other countries, whatever, developing countries or, post-colonial countries. But again, so I'm such an outlier because I did not have the pressure. So it's not like I had this weight on my neck that traditional racial groups, people from racial groups or cultural groups had to honor their traditions and their community. I didn't have that weight in Malaysia either. So for me, being a McCoy, a Malaysian McCoy, Sri Lankan mother with some Swedish and Dutch stuff, I was always able, in some sense, to choose my identity and how I would express my identity in the culture that I found myself. I don't know where my sense of I need to respect the home culture came from. So even when I was in Poland, with hanging out with a lot of expats from America and from Britain, helping Polish people learn English, which was their kind of lingua franca, it was a good an important skill to have at the time. I felt it was very important to try and learn Polish and to get into the culture, so I have a list of like favorite Polish movies and understanding where they came from and their journey. I just find that interesting. So in terms of British culture, I think obviously there are there are some really bad shit, and there are some real strengths that I think other cultures can kind of take in and fold into their own understanding of culture. So I think British culture has this ability to be adaptable and flexible. So it changes and it adapts, but it changes and adapts in a way that is slow enough that it doesn't lose itself in a sense. I mean, I don't think culture is just such a great thing. I think we should all be like super malleable, and not be held back by ancient ideas, which may or may not come largely from fear and anxiety and closeness rather than openness. But there is something about the pace of British change, which is too slow for some and too fast for others, that there is this pace that allows it to retain some things and yet also be adaptable. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think largely it's a good thing, I think.
Steve McCoy was talking to Colin Grant.